Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. General Hospital spoilers. Did Sonny shoot Kate's dead or was it all a fever dream? General Hospital, GH, spoilers suggest that the Friday, August 30 episode provided some over-the-top moments. Fans could feel as if something big was going to happen between Sonny Corinthos, Morris Bernard, and John Jagger Cates. Adam J. Harrington, as the FBI agent and mob boss, had a major confrontation in the dark rain right before the show closed. When Christina Corinthos Davis, Kate Mancy, left her mom's house in a hurry, only to end up at her dad's house to grab a gun, fans began to speculate John's days in Port Charles were numbered and that a whodunit storyline was on the horizon. There was also the comment Alexis Davis, Nancy Lee Gran, made at the police station as he was trying to book Christina for the umpteenth time, where she hinted she was going to stop John if she had to do it herself. However, things took a turn for the shocking when Sonny shot John, point blank, twice. John is definitely dead, but there's zero speculation over who did it. This is an interesting revelation on so many levels. Sonny's a mob boss, so it's not out of the ordinary for him to kill someone, but doing it at the Q Mansion, right near the boathouse, seems outrageous. No Jason Morgan, Steve Burton, around to help clean up his mess, plus some of his kids and grandkids were at the main house. What gives, and how will Sonny get out of this mess? Seems very sloppy for him to have just shot John where he did, since it also seemed premeditated. Plus, Sonny is back on his appropriate dose of bipolar meds, so he's thinking clearly. Does he have a cleanup crew coming? A plan B? Was this all a fever dream? GA's daily preview for Tuesday, September 3 seems to imply that both Michael Corinthos, Chad Duell, and Carly Spencer, Laura Wright, will get roped into this mess, but what happens next? Fans will have to tune in to find out. General Hospital spoilers hint that if the show was looking for a Friday cliffhanger that offered shock value, they hit the nail on the head. But how will Sonny escape any prison or repercussion for what he's done? The air inside Sonny Corinthos' penthouse was thick with tension. The night outside was eerily calm. The kind of quiet that suggested something ominous was lurking just out of sight. Sonny sat at his desk, his fingers lightly drumming against the dark wood, his eyes narrowed in thought. The events of the past few days had left him shaken in a way he hadn't felt in years. The underworld kingpin was used to chaos, but this felt different. It all began with Agent Cates. From the moment Cates arrived in Port Charles, Sonny knew he was trouble. There was something about the man's cold demeanor, the way he looked at Sonny as if he could see through every lie, every secret. Cates was no ordinary federal agent. He was relentless, determined to take Sonny down no matter the cost. For weeks, the agent had been closing in, his investigation tightening like a noose around Sonny's neck. The whispers on the streets, the sudden raids, the interrogations, it all pointed to one thing. Cates wanted Sonny behind bars, or worse, 6 feet under. Sonny's instincts, honed by years of surviving the darkest corners of the criminal world, told him to be careful. But as cautious as he was, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Paranoia began to creep in, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Every shadow seemed like a threat, every unfamiliar face a potential enemy. He found himself looking over his shoulder more often, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun tucked into his waistband. It was on one of those sleepless nights, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever, that it happened. Sonny had been pacing the penthouse, trying to shake the unease that had settled deep in his bones. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a reminder that time was running out. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light as he took a long, slow sip. But the alcohol did little to calm his nerves. His thoughts were racing, jumping from one scenario to another, each more dire than the last. And then, without warning, the door burst open. Agent Cates stood there, his eyes locked on Sonny. The tension in the room skyrocketed as the two men stared each other down, each waiting for the other to make a move. Cates' hand hovered near his holster, ready to draw his weapon at the slightest provocation. Sonny's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing as he tried to figure out what to do. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then everything happened at once. Cates lunged forward, his gun aimed directly at Sonny's chest. Sonny reacted on instinct, his own weapon appearing in his hand as if by magic. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, echoing through the penthouse like a thunderclap. Cates staggered back, a look of shock on his face as he crumpled to the ground, his lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. Sonny stood there, his gun still smoking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He couldn't believe what he had just done. Cates was dead, and Sonny was the one who had pulled the trigger. The reality of it hit him like a freight train. This was bad, worse than anything he had ever faced before. He had killed a federal agent in cold blood, and there was no coming back from that. Or had he? The days that followed were a blur. Sonny found himself questioning everything. Had he really killed Cates, or was it all just a fever dream? The more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. The events of that night seemed hazy, like a memory just out of reach. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. His paranoia only grew as the days passed. He started seeing Cates everywhere, in the faces of strangers, in the shadows that crept along the walls of his penthouse. The nightmares were the worst. Every time Sonny closed his eyes, he was back in that moment, pulling the trigger, watching as Cates fell to the ground. But when he woke up, drenched in sweat, he couldn't be sure if it had really happened, or if it was all just a product of his guilty conscience. The lines between reality and nightmare began to blur. Sonny started losing track of time, days blending into nights as he wrestled with the uncertainty. He became more withdrawn, snapping at those closest to him, unable to explain the turmoil raging inside his mind. Carly, his rock in times of crisis, grew increasingly concerned. She could see the change in him, the way he jumped at every little sound, the haunted look in his eyes. But every time she tried to talk to him, Sonny pushed her away, too afraid of what he might say if he let his guard down. Then came the whispers. Rumors started circulating in the underworld, whispers that Cates wasn't really dead. Some said he had survived the gunshot, that he was lying low, waiting for the right moment to strike. Others claimed that Cates had faked his death, part of an elaborate plan to take Sonny down from the inside. The uncertainty drove Sonny to the brink. He couldn't tell what was real anymore. Every time the phone rang, he expected it to be Cates, calling to tell him that the game was up. In his darkest moments, Sonny wondered if he was losing his mind. Was this all some kind of sick joke? Had Cates somehow gotten inside his head, planting false memories to drive him mad? The more he questioned it, the less certain he became. Finally, Sonny decided he couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. He returned to the scene of the crime, the penthouse where it had all gone down. The room was exactly as he remembered it, down to the clock on the wall ticking away the seconds. Sonny stood in the middle of the room, his heart pounding in his chest as he replayed the events of that night in his mind. He walked through it step by step, trying to piece together what had really happened. And then in a moment of clarity, it all came rushing back. Sonny remembered the look on Cates' face, the way the agent had smirked just before lunging at him. He remembered pulling the trigger, the way Cates had crumpled to the ground, the pool of blood spreading across the floor. It wasn't a dream. It had really happened. Cates was dead, and Sonny had killed him. But as the reality set in, so did the fear. Sonny knew he was in deep trouble. Killing a federal agent was the kind of crime that couldn't be swept under the rug, not even by someone with Sonny's connections. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. As Sonny stood there, staring at the spot where Kate's had fallen, he realized there was only one way out. He had to cover his tracks, make sure there was no evidence linking him to the crime. It was a risky move, but it was the only way to protect himself and those he cared about. With a heavy heart, Sonny set to work, erasing every trace of what had happened. When he was done, the penthouse was spotless, as if nothing had ever occurred. But even as he left the room, a gnawing feeling remained. No matter how hard he tried to convince himself otherwise, Sonny knew that Kate's death would haunt him for the rest of his life. Whether it was real or just a fever dream, the consequences were the same. Sonny Corinthos had crossed a line, and he would have to live with the fallout. But deep down, in the darkest corners of his mind, Sonny couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning.